Hello, viewers. Today we are joined by Dr. Nilanjan Banik, Professor of Economics and Finance at the School of Management, Mahindra University at Hyderabad. Nilanjan brings a blend of academic rigor and real world insight with a PhD in economics from Utah State University and a master's from the Delhi School of Economics. His research spans the application of international trade, market structure, and development economics. He has also contributed to the study of WTO rules, especially on non-tariff barriers. So, as global trade faces new uncertainties amid rising protectionism and shifting geopolitical alliances, we look for his perspective on how these developments could impact India and the broader global economy. A warm welcome to you from Basis Point Insight, Nilanjan.
Thanks, Ranjana, for having me over here.
So, we've seen China respond in a very studied and calibrated manner to the tariff pressures from the Trump administration. At this stage, does it feel as if China actually holds the upper hand in the standoff? And how do you read their overall strategy and what are the implications for countries like India?
Indeed, it does. So let me try to explain the narrative with one single sentence, which is China at this point of time is trying to build bridges, whereas US under Trump, they are actually creating wall. So let me try to explain what's happening. So we interestingly have a situation where over the last few years, where what we have seen that the US was actively trying to help out its allies. In particular, at the time of Joe Biden, we have seen how Mr. Biden was trying to help out NATO in terms of supporting the Ukraine in the context of Russia-Ukraine war. We have also seen increased amount of trade happening between US with two of its important trading partners, namely Canada and Mexico at the time of Joe Biden. We have also seen US proactively taking roles in terms of formalizing in what we called this ACAS, which comprise of US, UK, Australia. And of course, to mention about the Quad, where India is also a member in addition to Japan, US, and South Korea. Now, all this narrative has now started to change. Why? Because what we are seeing at this point of time, Mr. Trump is not kind of distinguishing between his allies as opposed to his adversaries. Now, we have seen this reciprocal tariff, irrespective of whether you are close to US or not, in terms of your ideology, in terms of your trading partners, in terms of your the commitment, For instance, US has committed giving defense kind of protection to almost 148 different countries. Now, for the first time, we are hearing from Mr. Trump that be it Japan, be it South Korea, be it NATO alliance, everyone has to pay for this, the defense agreement which they have had with the US. Remember, China has only one such defense agreement, and that country is North Korea. Okay. Now, in addition to that, what we are also seeing is in terms of tariff being in place, Mr. Trump is actually going and imposing tariff left, right, and center, even among its own allies, For instance, in case of Canada, in case of Mexico, two of the largest trading partners of the US, we have seen that how much tariff Mr. Trump has imposed. It's the other fact that he is actually testing the water, in the sense that he is initially imposing the tariff and then trying to see what is the implication of that tariff being imposed and how much the trading partners are reciprocating. And on the basis of that, he is actually pausing and maybe keeping some items outside the realm of tariff. Now, on the other hand, what China is doing, this is also very interesting. Now, because US trading partners, in particular the European Union, in particular Canada and Mexico, they are reciprocating, China is trying to fill in this void. So when we are looking into Canada, they are now sending in the crude oil, which earlier they were sending it to the US. Because of the tariff, now Canada is finding it useful to do more trade with European Union and China. Mexico was otherwise exporting refined petroleum product to the US. Now with this tariff in place, they are now doing increasing trade with China as well as European Union. China, on the other hand, they have also reciprocated in terms of putting additional tariff measures and instead buying all these agricultural items, including meat and sausages, which earlier they used to procure from US. Now they are procuring from the European Union members, in particular Germany and Spain. China is also procuring lots of crude oil. I've already mentioned about Canada, but they're also procuring it from countries like Venezuela. So, and interestingly, in all this, while all these things are playing out, what the European allies, they were kind of taken by surprise to listen to Mr. Trump kind of supporting Mr. Putin, you know. So earlier, their adversaries were, as per when Mr. Joe Biden was in power, it was only China who was seen to be supporting Russia. But now the NATO allies are finding that even Mr. Trump, he is kind of going for this ceasefire, but in a way supporting the Russian president, Mr. Putin. Now, China, as I said, it is trying to build a wall in the sense that China already have started reaching out to the all these allies of US, and increasingly it is also gaining ground in the sense that in the month of July, you will find that the EU and China, they are going to go for a big summit where they are going to talk about the trade issues. They're trying to iron out some of the differences in terms of non-tariff measures, which earlier were the NATO members were placing on China. And mind you, thanks to US, they were not trading in all these chips, which are so much important for the defense as well as for the electronic components items that China is producing. Okay. Now, what is happening is rather than going on a country-specific issues, European Union now they are trading on issue-specific issues, where they are trying to see that whether the China can give them access to the rare earth material. China is actually the house of almost 80% of the world rare earth material, you know. And no matter what Mr. Trump says that he's going to conquer Greenland, that's another issue going after Denmark. You know, Greenland was so far is under control of Denmark, but now Trump says that something which has happened after Second World War, through that treaty, they are going to take back Greenland from Denmark. He even went ahead and told that Canada will also be one of the state of the US, you know. So most of the ally of Mr. Trump, they are kind of perplexed. And in this scenario, in this volatile scenario, what they're trying to do, they are thinking that it makes sense to do trade on issue-specific thing with China. And that is something we are seeing in the context of what is happening in the context of the opportunities which are being now created by US, now being taken by the Chinese players. Now, we have also seen in the context of China, they were also having some kind of problems with this. Most of the countries in Southeast Asia, in particular Philippines, Vietnam, Taiwan, and to a certain extent with South Korea and Japan. Because there are some kind of islands, namely Spratly Islands in the Pacific Ocean, where the ownership, China has some problem with the ownership of those islands, and therefore they were in some kind of diplomatic issues. They were having problem with Philippines, Vietnam, and also Singapore, and also South Korea and Japan. They are trying to iron it out in the sense that 2 weeks back, they have now employed one special envoy. And we have seen Mr. President Xi traveling to these three countries, namely Malaysia, Cambodia, and Vietnam, where they are trying to, as I said, build the bridges in terms of having more trade happening with the Southeast Asian countries, in addition to what I've just now mentioned, having more trade with some of the close ally of the US. You should also know trade is just one component, because if I look into the investment, China has already invested close to 1 trillion US dollar, be it building the railway lines which connect between Kunming with Thailand. They have actually built the entire railway system between Lao PDR and China. The entire railway network built in Indonesia is again with the Chinese money. And we have already seen that they are building port in South Asian countries, in particular Pakistan and Sri Lanka. If you look into the hydropower project, which are being built in, again, Myanmar and Lao PDR, again with Chinese money. So what I'm trying to argue is China has already tried, in addition to investing through building bridges, and roads, ports, and airports. It is kind of complementing their idea of doing more trade with all these other countries. So in addition to doing trade, they're also investing so as to complement this narrative of doing more trade. And therefore, we see that China is increasingly becoming kind of as if they don't care about what the US does. Because what China have done very cleverly is they have shifted their production bases to other countries, through which they were actually now exporting to the US. So even if US is importing a high tariff on China, they seems to care less. The case in point is Mexico. In fact, you will note that the previous trade representative of USTR, Miss Catherine Tao, she went in public stating that most of the goods, in particular automobiles and other automobile components items, which are now coming through Mexico to US, are actually of Chinese origin. Now, interestingly, between the year 2020 and 24, you will find that the Chinese FDI investment in Mexico, it has quadrupled. What used to be around 1 billion US dollar in 2023, the Chinese FDI inflow to Mexico went up as much as high as 4 billion US dollar. Most of the Chinese company, there are now 30 Chinese companies which are now operating out of Mexico, be it BYD, be it Sherry International, all these automotive companies, most of them now are operating in Mexico, and they are actually pushing their product through the Mexico. The other interesting fact is I've mentioned about the Chinese investment in the Southeast Asian region. You will also find lots of Chinese factories in Vietnam. If you go to Vietnam, most of the Vietnamese factories, manufacturing units are actually controlled by the Chinese. Now, again, the World Bank report says that the trade between Vietnam and US, it has increased by 40% in the year 2024. Trade between Mexico and US, it has increased by 20 billion US dollar in the year 2024. Whereas, interestingly, trade between US and China, it actually fell by 10 billion US dollar. So what this is basically telling you, it is basically telling you that China has already spread its production base. It cares less how much tariff Mr. Trump imposes, because so far as tariff is concerned, it is country specific. So if I am shifting my production base, I'm actually getting away from this incidence of tariff. So that's exactly what is happening right now in the world. The only problematic thing, as I see now, is some of the bigger issues which these two big economies, namely US and China, could have fought together. In particular, issues like climate control, in particular, issues like unbridled expansion of artificial intelligence. Now, because US and China are fighting with each other, we don't have enough of fund which will go towards these two most important issues, in particular the climate change, as well as the how to control the artificial intelligence stuff.
With the US reportedly now planning to tighten inspections related to rules of origin, do you think Indian exports could suffer collateral damage, especially in sectors where Chinese inputs are significant?
So first of all, after Galwan thing happened,
Hmm.
we kind of restricted Chinese FDI flow into India, you know, only to realize it is actually creating more harm to our manufacturing sector as opposed to giving incentive, because now we are all part of integrated supply chain. Even if you go to, for instance, I went to visit Japan. I bought a laptop, Sony laptop. Predominantly, it's a big Japanese company, but I was surprised to note it's says made in China. Okay, so this example is just to showcase the fact that this entire supply chain network is embedded. Now, when you say that you are going to impose this clause on rules of origin, it is so difficult to implement. For instance, even for the mobile, as you know that we have now manufacturing thanks to our production linked incentive scheme. India has become one of the largest exporter of Apple iPhone, which are being manufactured from, it's based in Tamil Nadu. Tata and Foxconn, they have entered into some kind of collaboration. But even for this simple mobile handset, smartphone, it has to cross the border between India and China almost 20 to 25 times for a single handset I'm talking about. Now, as you know, and for this reason perhaps, you will see that Mr. Trump, because it's so difficult to monitor, he has kept this electronic items as well as the mobile handset items out of the purview for tariff, because it's not that easy to ensure the rules of origin. Of course, the rules of origin you can talk about in terms of finished good, but even within the finished good, you'll have to give a definition what percentage has to qualify for that item to be originating from a particular country A or B. Now, the very fact this supply chain is so much integrated, it even become difficult for which the data is not available. For instance, because whenever we are looking at data, we are talking about 6-digit level or maybe at most 8-digit level. But we are not talking about this level of granularity where to implement this rules of origin can itself be a problematic. So I don't think this tariff measures is going to work. What is going to work and what we are seeing is the non-tariff measures, which no one is talking about. For instance, I'll give you a simple example. If I'm talking about 25 percentage tariff on steel, if I were to add the non-tariff measures, this will go up as high as 200%. So the cost component of non-tariff measures is much, much higher than what you see in the what is being included in tariff. So in that way, this rules of origin, I don't think it's going to be that helpful.
Right. So, in the same vein, we know that India is considering new tariff and quality control measures to prevent, becoming a dumping ground for goods diverted from the US. Now, could these protective steps also end up hurting India's own exports, especially to China and Southeast Asia?
So one good thing which has happened is because of US acting very aggressively against the Chinese exports. Earlier, what used to happen, most of these Chinese manufacturers, they were not open to the fact that if they were to start exporting from India by opening up their factories in India, they were not open to the idea that the collaborating partner should be the majority stakeholder. The good news is after Trump went after the Chinese manufacturers, they have now agreed to this clause where they are also agreeing that, okay, we are going to start manufacturing in India with a majority clause with the or with the majority stake with the Indian counterpart. For instance, the compressor that goes in the in any air conditioning unit, that Chinese firm is one of the largest in the world. They have now entered into a collaboration with Tata's Voltas. So they are going to manufacture in conjunction with Tata Voltas. Likewise, we are seeing it happening for other white goods, in particular LED televisions, refrigerators, air conditioners. I've already mentioned. So we are increasingly seeing that China has the Chinese manufacturing firms, they have kind of mellowed down, and because of this tariff, so that is in a way good thing for India. But the other thing the Indian policymakers should be, they should take into account that because the Chinese, although they have kind of diversified, like what I stated in my opening remarks, but still because of the tariff, they might try to push hard by cutting down their price, in particular devaluing yuan further and trying to push their product in India, for which, of course, India can they can apply all these non-tariff measures. In particular, as you know, when it comes to anti-dumping measures, which is the most popular type of non-tariff measures, the most impacted country when it comes to India's imposing anti-dumping measures, it is again China. So in that way, we are able to safeguard our steel, safeguard some of the commodity sectors that you're talking about. So we have policy measures in place, which is going to maybe help our own industry in that way, if that there is a requirement. But I never support, because eventually you will have to give give scheme like PLI, production linked incentive scheme, in order to make our manufacturing sector much more competitive. Otherwise, how long can you give subsidy, or how long can you give protection?
That's right. So now back to India-US, the trade talks, and we hear that it's coming up quite well. Do you foresee India making concessions to the US on agricultural trade? And how can the government navigate this very sensitive area without alienating rural voters, given that the US may not be satisfied with only non-tariff barriers in place?
See, I don't give much importance to the US-India trade for the simple reason, if I look into the total Indian exports going to the US and look into what percentage of US import is our total export, it is around 2%. Now, if for a big country like US, 2% is not a big deal. Only 2% of their imports are coming from India. And we are talking about agriculture, but most of the time, this tariff which are being in place does not, in economics, we say it's a water tariff. Water tariff means you have imposed a tariff without actually trying to understand whether this tariff is going to be prohibitive in nature. For instance, for the items, agricultural produce, which India has very less presence. If you are talking about blueberries, cranberries, almonds, India hardly, in the whole gamut of things, India hardly produces this agricultural items. And yet we find that for these agricultural items, India has imposed a very high tariff barriers. So even if we remove those tariff barriers, it's not going to impact us. On the other hand, it's actually going to give our consumer much more choices in terms of getting some more healthy product from a country like US at a time when India is actually not producing those products. Of course, there are some fine areas that need to be meted out. For instance, if I'm talking about dairy products, for a country like India, which is predominantly, many of our citizens are actually vegetarians. So they have raised the obligation that what kind of fodder are being fed to this US cattle, because if you are feeding a fodder which is non veg, or which are animal, which are based out of animal product, of course, for country like India, with a dominant population who are vegetarian, they might raise objection. But to be very frank, when you're drinking milk or cheese or curds, do you actually care to, to read the fine print? This is on the more realistic side. So this is some of the. So in that way, I don't think the agricultural agreement which we are trying to sign with the US for the product they are trying to sell to our to the Indian market, I don't think that is going to cause much difficulty for our farmers for the simple reason they are not growing those products. I mentioned about the dairy products. Let me also mention about this whiskey, or for that matter, it was raised that this bonbon whiskey.
Bourbon.
Yeah. So now, interestingly, India Ministry of Commerce, I think, has given a statement that they're reducing the direct tariff, but at the same time, they are actually imposing an additional duty, which is domestic. So what it means when it comes to the end consumer, again, the price will not vary much. Even if I am showcasing to the US that I have removed the tariff, and then I'm imposing a special additional duty, at the end of the day, in terms of the revenue, the government is still earning the revenue, right? And most of the revenue on alcohol is a state subject. Of course, you also have a central levy. But what I'm trying to argue is, as per WTO rules, I can always bring down my tariff and at the same time increase some of the domestic tariff, it's not tariff, the domestic tax, I would say, so that the government still continue to get the revenue, So in net, I don't think in terms of agriculture, dairy, or for that matter, even alcohol items, which the US is raising a concern, is or should be a matter of concerns for the Indian policymakers. Of course, if I'm talking about things like Harley-Davidson, which is a motorbike, there can be some issues, or for that matter, giving inroad to Tesla, electric vehicles. But again, when we are talking about electric vehicles, if you're reducing tariff for Tesla, because you are confirming the WTO rules, that means you're also giving red carpet to the Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, which is BYD. And at any given point of time, BYD is much more competitive in terms of features as well as the price, because I have had the fortune of riding both these cars, and there is no comparison between choosing or given a choice. People will go for BYD, right? Likewise, Indian car automobile manufacturers, Mahindra, they have got, it's a very good value for money if I were to compare that with Jeep Cherokee, or for that matter, Ford or any other US automobile car, So I don't see any reason why India is going to lose out. On the other hand, in fact, India is going to get benefited from this, because we are trying simultaneously to do some kind of parallel agreement with European Union. As you know, we are also trying to ink FTA with European Union. In the process of signing FTA and in the process of bringing down tariff barriers, when we are doing or working with America, if we can do the same thing, because once you have reduced your tariff barriers, there is no pain points. You can always use that as your benchmark when you actually go ahead and sign deals with other region or regional blocks. So in that way, I think it's going to be beneficial for India as opposed to harming our cause.
So from largely farm, I'd like to now take up a bit of industry. So what strategies do you think India should adopt to encourage Chinese companies and other global firms to use India as more than just an assembly hub?
So I've already mentioned that earlier government was very particular or about that whenever the Chinese company is coming and setting up their base in India, they should have an India partner, and they have agreed now that the majority stakeholder would be the Indian partner. Apart from that, and this is very important, the government should also kind of impose a clause saying that, okay, you are now co-producing with your Indian counterpart, but there should be also a transfer of technology happen, in the process of co-production. Because we need those technology, and maybe because of that, I think government has also imposed that, or thinking about imposing that clause, and maybe because of that, most of these Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, they are not trying to come and set up their base in India because they fear that, and they are in no mood to share this technology with the Indian counterpart, because we are already having a very robust automobile industry in India. And the only thing which is perhaps we are not in line with what is in China is our capability to produce this green vehicles at such a low cost. So that is one thing that India government is looking at, and they are very proactive. For instance, we are also saying that you can come and build ship in India. For instance, Cochin shipyard. It's so long we are building ships, but we don't have that technology to build this big deep oil tankers, which is there with Samsung and other countries in Russia and France. So right now we are kind of, even for this defense sector, we are importing this GE General Electric engines for our Tejas aircraft. So the government is saying that, well, for the first few tranche we are going to import, but going forward it has to be with Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, where you also actually share some kind of technology with us, so that we also start building our own flying engines. So this kind of clause, increasingly government is bringing and trying to see that whether we also get access to this cutting edge technology, which is very much important for a growing economy like India. So that is something what we are going to see happening much more aggressively as we go forward.
Uh, Now, for the markets, in an earlier interview, you had said Trump's attempts to weaken the dollar were unlikely to succeed. So, in the current context, what would be the likely impact on India if China continues to deliberately devalue its yuan?
Mhm. So, see, the Trump's argument is faulty for one simple reason. So, US is running trade deficit with almost all its trading partners. But what Mr. Trump is not kind of arguing, or for that matter, acknowledging, is the fact that US, by the same argument, run trade surplus in the capital account, on the services account. Now, whatever trade deficit the countries have with the US, they are actually investing that amount in buying US Treasury or the US bonds. So you cannot have both the thing at the same time. You are saying that US dollar is the world reserve currency, and at the same time you're trying to weaken the dollar. So either you give up this idea of US dollar being the world reserve currency, and that too he has a problem, because he went officially stating that if BRICS were to trade among themselves in their own currency, US is going to impose sanction. So economics, you have to understand the entire part of economics. It's not that economics is operating in silos. So for that matter, if he really wants to weaken the dollar, he have to give up this idea that US has the maximum voting right in most of the multilateral agencies like World Bank or IMF. It has to give up the idea that it has the maximum amount of holding in terms of spatial drawing rights. It has also have to give up the idea that dollar continues to remain the reserve currency. It has to also give up the idea that you are still operating under what we call SWIFT. Like when the Russia-Ukraine war broke. At that point of time, they put a sanction saying that no more SWIFT transaction can happen. So either you give up all this facilities that US dollar is enjoying as a reserve currency, or you cannot have both happening. That you want to devalue the dollar at the same time you still hold on to US dollar as the reserve currency.
Now, this brings me to my last question. Given these shifts in global trade and politics, what would be your top advice to Indian policymakers over the next 5 years? And where should India focus most to secure its long term economic future?
So 5 years is too too long a time, because he will be gone within the next 3.5 years, right? And although right now the sentiment in the US says that he is becoming the most unpopular president, given what he is doing with all this his tantrums. But for India, I think the message is very loud and clear, and I also wrote about it. You have to wait and watch, because I don't think he's going to continue with this his reciprocal tariff, because he's going to see sooner or later that that is going to hit US domestic inflation, and if that happens, the US bond price is going to go up, which means the value of US bond is going to come down, which has happened 2 weeks back. There were no takers of US bond or US Treasury, So the market will ensure that he cannot keep on continuing doing all this crazy stuff that he's trying to do. So my advice for the Indian policymakers would be, as I said, India is not going to lose out much, because given our trade with the US, to bring down the tariff, because in some cases our tariff is too high for the items which we don't actually manufacture. If you're not manufacturing the items or producing the items in India for which you have put a high tariff, doesn't make any sense at all. Who you are trying to protect if there is no manufacturers? So you better try to negotiate and try to bring down this tariff. You actually try to negotiate on our services where we have actually got the comparative advantage. So all these issues related to H-1B visa, all these issues relating to investment, where companies like TCS, Infosys, they can work on their offsite projects, outside India, how to give them access towards investment and things like that. I think that Indian policymakers should give more priority, as opposed to getting lost in whether to reduce tax on agricultural tariff.
So thank you so much, Nilanjan, for making sense of such a fast-moving and complicated landscape.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And your insights on, trade, tariffs, and India's strategic options are very valuable, especially at a time when, the rules of the game seem to be shifting every day. And we'll be watching how these global trade dynamics evolve, and hope to hear more from you soon.
Okay, it will be a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.